All right, the tide has slowed a bit on people asking to join the meeting, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am going to begin the meeting by noting that we are recording this meeting. Just for everyone's information, we are going to have these weekly trainings on the minor source emissions inventory and use of the AEIR system every week on Thursdays at 2 p.m. through the end of February. We hope you can join us for all of them. Next week, we're going to have a special training at this same time for use of the Calcatenate program, which is our emissions inventory calculation tool we are putting out. This should be particularly helpful for those of you with smaller facilities and just a few facilities, including the construction industry. So that's those of you working with the asphalt, concrete, aggregate, and the like. If you are a small business and you want assistance, we do encourage you to contact our small business assistance program to see if they can help you out. I have put their contact info in the chat box. Speaking of the chat box, if you have any questions at any point during today's meeting, there are two ways to get them addressed. You can either type them in that chat box, which is the little caption icon, like a speech bubble in a cartoon, either at the bottom middle of your screen or at the top right of your screen. If you would prefer to ask your question aloud and speak, or if you can't find that chat box, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand. That icon should, again, be either in the bottom middle of your screen or the top right of your screen. It's just a little hand icon, and we'll be able to see that you have your hand up and call on you to ask your question when it's the right time. We will be pausing intermittently throughout today to answer questions. Another announcement is that we will be opening up our registration for Manage eSign early next week, and hopefully we will have a training on using that coming in the near future. And with that, I think we're ready to hand it over to Rosalind, one of our emissions inventory specialists, to start talking about the minor source emissions inventory and use of the AEIR reporting system. And Rosalind, I think I may have muted you.
Okay, thank you, Angela. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. This is a large turnout. So I'd like to start off by asking, and you can use the little hand icon, how many of you here are with the construction industry? And that would be asphalt, cement, or aggregate. Okay, 6, 8, numbers growing. Good. So the small business, 9. Okay. So the Small Business Administration, small business can help you. We'll be able to help you. So will we. So you can definitely contact us because you may qualify for extra help. And we'd be happy to do that. So the rest of you, I imagine, are oil and gas. And let's see, what we're going to do today is cover some basics. We made some changes since we met. If you did not attend any of our trainings last year, that's absolutely fine. We're going to go over some basics today for those of you who are new today, and for those of you who may have forgotten some of the basics or need some help with some of the basics. So please interrupt me at any time and ask a question. I have absolutely no problem with that. It's more important that you understand how to go about entering information into AEIR and get all your questions answered. And it doesn't hurt my feelings at all if you interrupt. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is navigate to the correct web page, and Sean is working with me and he'll be driving. And I want you to pay attention to this very carefully because I want you to tab this page. So if you land on the Air Quality Bureau homepage, you can just Google that in and it will take you straight to this page. We'll show you the fast and easy, dirty way to get there. Click on inventory as Sean is demonstrating. We inventory emissions, click on inventory, it's a hyperlink. And it takes you to the emissions inventory page. Now, this page gives you some information that may be really interesting and important for you to review. I recommend that you review it. But let's right now click on, here's the information about submitting your emissions inventory. So we're getting right down to the bones. Okay, so this is a page that you need to tab because this is the one that you'll be going back to often. It's the emission inventory submittal page. To access AEIR, you can easily click on the picture to the right, and that will take you straight to AEIR. Some basic information under 2020 emissions inventory. As you know, the window opened January 1st, 2021, and they are due April 1st, 2021. So let's scroll down. And so we're going over different sections, the emissions inventory submittal methods, instructions to access AEIR. This is really important. If you have not accessed AEIR yet, I highly recommend that you click on the written instructions, and it has a lot of snapshots. So you know step by step if you're doing the right thing. So it will be very easy to follow. The other thing you can do if you don't like that method is a video. We have 9 YouTube videos out right now. We're continuing to add. So if you click on any of these, you can like it and subscribe. That way, every time we send out a new video, you will be alerted. And we'd really appreciate it. We're really using YouTube as much as possible. Okay, so the section that is really important to you is the instructions to complete emissions inventory. The emissions inventory guidance document is the very first link. We have recently updated it, and we will continue to update it as we get more information, more questions, and we learn more. But right now, this is the latest one, and we are very proud of it. And it has step-by-step instructions. Also, we have some videos associated to supplement the guidance document. And one of them is creating a new submittal, very basic. How do you create a new AEIR submittal video? Also, another video on manually adding equipment to an NOI. And the XML training I highly recommend is the last one. It's a training session from December 16th, 2020, and there are timestamps. So if there's specifics that you're looking for, you can go through this YouTube video and find the information that you want. Instructions to certify. Oh, yes.
Sorry, Rosalind. Sean, we've had a request for you to make the screen bigger so it's easier to read. So if you could just Control+ to get the tab.
Does that look good?
That's better. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good. Okay, so we have some information on certifying, on the certification process. It's called Manage eSign, and we will briefly touch on that today. But we will, as Angela had mentioned, it will be ready next week, and there are several companies who have already submitted inventories and are ready for certification, but we have currently turned off the certification process because we're waiting for this other piece to be completed, and now it's completed. So we will post the instructions on how to do that. It will be in PDF form under this section, under instructions to certify completed inventory, probably by tomorrow, today or tomorrow. And so you will be able to follow those instructions and become an official certifier, and then start certifying your submittals. The next section is emissions inventory guidance related to the construction industries. These 3 documents contain information about the pieces of equipment that need to be listed and added to your NOI or GCP, and the ones that are interchangeable. So please refer to these documents. If you have any questions, let us know. We'll talk more about construction industry throughout today's course. The live training sessions, if you lose your, if you forget what date or how long we will be doing these, we'll be doing these, you can see, for every week on Thursday at 2 o'clock till February 25th. We're hoping to really everybody through this process. We understand it can be complicated. There's a lot of really great questions and issues that are popping up. Since a little bit of history, we normally do about 150 Title V for our emissions inventory. And for 2020, this is a very special year. We are, for the first time, doing all the minor sources, which include the GCPs and NSRs, and most importantly, the NOIs, which are notice of intents. So to gain access to all these training sessions, here is the link. It will be on here until the 25th. And also the industrial codes, there's some references down here that you may be interested in. General information, there's several videos that we have, and also slides from outreach activities if you are interested in gaining some more information. Okay, so let's go back and look at the guidance document. We're not going to show the video. This one, we want you to really look at the guidance video on your own, the training video on your own. This is the how to gain access to AEIR. How to gain access to AEIR. There are 3 roles, user roles, and this is really important that everybody understand. We have to approve facility administrator. You need to request a facility administrator role. And as a facility administrator, you are allowed to approve a certifier and a preparer/submitter. In most cases, a submitter or preparer is a consultant. A facility administrator can be somebody from the company, which is preferred. But also we've had facility administrators that are a consultant. The preparer submitter role is a person who can submit the data but not certify it, just submit it for certification. And companies may employ consultants to do this. The certifier is a role that we normally prefer. Since this is end up being a copy of record, a legal document, it is important that an owner, operator, responsible official, or company official is registered as a certifier, and those are the only ones that we want going through the Manage e-sign process. And through the rest of this document, we're not going to go over it, but it has several snapshots on what link to use, how to request AEIR access, and so on, and the responses that you'll see. And if you get any errors, the profile information you need to fill out, the application registration, where it is, what it looks like. And so please go through that and make sure you have access to AEIR. That's number one, okay? And you register for a specific role. That's important. Okay, so now let's go on to the guidance document. And this one is going to be really important. This holds a lot of information from questions, details. The table of contents is a hyperlink. We try to cover everything that we've been asked about, and we think it's going to come up as an issue. So let's go on down to the introduction. So the most important part here is that this document contains instructions on how to use AEIR, AEIR, which stands for the Air Emissions Inventory Reporting System, which is a web-based tool so you can submit your emissions inventory to NMED. And from there, we review it, and we may ask you questions. We review the information, and we submit it to EPA. And we have a deadline for that. Okay, and so we have added enhancements to AEIR to add equipment, but that is for notice of intents, GCPs 2, 3, 5, and 6s. Okay, let me repeat that. That's for a notice of intent. You can add equipment or GCP 2, 3, 5, and 6. So notice of intents, as I was mentioning earlier, and GCPs are included in this minor source, which bumps the number up from 150 normal submittals from Title V's. Now, including minor sources, we're going to have about 5,000. That's what we're estimating. Okay, so let's scroll on down. And there's some basic information about the regulated air pollutants, and you can read over that. We are also requiring that the parent company report greenhouse gases. If you are reporting to EPA, then you're required to report to AQV for 2020 by the company, by the parent company, not by the facility. But if you would like to, if you don't have to submit to EPA, we do welcome any information that you have that you can submit to us. That would be really helpful. Okay, and let's talk about actual emissions versus permitted, potential emission rate, PER, and potential to emit, PTE. So the purpose of an emissions inventory is to collect actual emissions. Those are the actual emissions that are emitted from a piece of equipment, not the permitted amount, because a lot of times the permitted amount is much larger than the actual amount that is being emitted. Sometimes the actual amount being emitted is much higher than the permitted amount because of excess emissions. We do not accept potential emissions rate. Do not submit that, and do not submit your potential to emit. We need to see actual calculations using the methods of calculating actual emissions as we have listed here. And what's important in that is maintaining, as we have said for months now, maintaining records related to your operating hours, your production rates, the quantities of materials processed, stored, and combusted. Okay, let's scooch on down. So what's really important with emissions inventory, I know that a lot of you already have to submit your excess emissions to AQB-CR, but they also need to be added in your emissions inventory. So all excess emissions must be included in your emissions inventory submittal, including malfunctions and startup, shutdown, maintenance. The importance of these three and the significance of these three is that they are actual emissions, which we are collecting, and they must be submitted through the piece of equipment from which it was emitted from. Thank you. So, report them under the corresponding equipment for the emissions inventory. So if you have any questions about that, let us know. Do not create a line item for SSMs or excess emissions or malfunctions. Permitting does things differently than what emissions inventory needs to do them. And it's important that we know that where the emissions actually came from, the corresponding equipment. And you can refer to Appendix A for a list of unit categories and unit types. Okay, let's go down to fugitives. So let's see, fugitive emissions are those emissions which could not reasonably pass through a stack, a chimney, a vent, or other functionally equivalent opening. So there are two types: emissions that cannot be attributed to a single source, we call those plant fugitives, and two, emissions that can be attributed to a single source. So plant fugitives are emitted from multiple sources across the entire plant. They include flanges, valves, connectors, seals. AP42 contains that information. So you can use that for your plant emissions. And then the other one would be where you know fugitives are coming from haul roads, tank vents, loading, unloading, transfer points, crushers, and other volume sources. So there's a good explanation in here of that. And Sean will cover this more. Angela?
It looks like we have questions.
Okay.
First, sorry, I have a little bit of feedback. Could you mute yourself, Roslyn?
Oh, yes.
First question is, for supporting document emission spreadsheet, do we need to show uncontrolled emissions or just controlled emissions?
For the supporting documentation, I don't know if there's supporting documentations for uncontrolled emissions. I would use AP42. Or I was asked about LDAR, LIR, if anybody's using that.
I think maybe the answer to this is it depends on how you calculate your emissions. Tien, so if you calculate your emissions using AP42, often you will have to calculate your uncontrolled emissions and then show the control percentage. But it is slightly specific to your calculation method.
Yes, writing down the percent of efficiency of your control equipment would be really helpful. But we're looking for the emissions being emitted into the atmosphere. If it's being controlled, then I would recommend that you only submit what's being controlled, because that's what's being emitted. So it would be with the control equipment. Okay, I hope that answers your question. There's some more information in here. I'm not going to go over every single little thing because we have a lot to go over. So please refer to this section if you have more questions. Let's scooch on down.
We do have one more question. Laura, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This is Laura. You just said a minute ago about like malfunction and SSM emissions to not add those to the EI. And I understand reporting turbine emissions or compressor emissions at that unit. But what about malfunction emissions that aren't associated with that unit? They're not fugitives, they're malfunction emissions as permitted. Is that not where we would put those emissions in the EI?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think let's go back up to excess emissions and malfunctions. No, all of these need to be added to your emissions inventory, but they need to be added not as a separate line item unless it shows up that way. Some NSRs already do, but we prefer that you take excess emissions, malfunctions, startup and shutdown and maintenance activities and apply them to the corresponding equipment from which the emissions came.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That's fine, but there are also excess emissions malfunctions that are not associated with a different unit. They're a different piece of equipment that's not necessarily included in the emissions inventory. It's still a malfunction, and that's how it's tracked and reported. So would that not go in the malfunction emission row? Because our NSRs are already set up with those two separate line items.
If your NSRs are already set up that way, then that's fine. You can do it like that, or you can put it under plant fugitives. If you have an NSR, you won't be able to add equipment.
Yeah. Well, our fugitives are set up to monitor those components and with a specific emission factor, and that's what they already are. So these would be excess, and they're permitted to go under that malfunction line item. I just wanted to know where we should put them, if not there. That's where we've always reported them in the past for Title V as well. And
for this situation, I think that would be fine. That's the way it was originally designed, set up. So I would continue with that same.
And I have one more similar question. We have some facilities that are set up to blow down to a flare. And so those flare emissions capture those blowdown events or malfunction events already and are reported at the flare by default. Is that okay? Because they originated at the turbine or the compressor or the engine or something, but the emissions come out at the flare.
Yes, wherever it was released is the piece of equipment that is where you add where the emissions came from.
Okay, cool.
Perhaps it would help a little bit if I stepped in here and explained that the reason we're asking that you report your fugitives and SSM and malfunction type events at the piece of equipment where they were released is because we intend or we hope to use this data for modeling of the region or of specific areas. So it's very helpful to us to know the full emissions that came from each piece of equipment along with the stack information for that piece of equipment, rather than having all of, say, the SSM emissions from a facility lumped into one category where we don't know which pieces of equipment did that SSM.
And that makes, I understand that on a conceptual level, but we do have two different scenarios that happen we've had permitted at our sites. One is where the engine itself is permitted, and then the compressor is a separate process unit, and the blowdowns would actually happen at the compressor. And it makes sense to report those emissions there. But at a lot of our facilities, there's just one process unit called Engine 1, and it is actually the compressor and the engine. But so there's not actually blowdowns from the engine itself, it's from the compressor. And so that's a little confusing with your modeling for the engine when it's actually the compressor blowing it down. And that's why they're normally grouped as SSMs in one process unit to not go over permitted limits.
For some of this, there does have to be, like I said, we prefer that it comes from the piece of equipment it actually came from. So in a case like that, where it's coming from the compressor that's listed under SSM because it's not an actual permitted piece of equipment, it may make sense to list it under that SSM line in your NSR permit.
Okay. Is there anything wrong with reporting it under that engine, even though we understand that it's not the compressor? We're kind of calling it a unit itself, like a compressor / engine. Is that just trying to figure out if I need to split up all of my SSM logs for all my facilities to report by unit as with the actual emissions, or as we had before under SSM process unit? Like, I need to figure out now until I get into March, like how those need to be split up or not. And
I think it's probably fine to report them to the engine as long as the release point is relatively similar.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to keep going, Rosalind, because we have a couple questions while we were going through that. The first one is about what about the people with NOIs instead of NSRs for SSM emissions? And if you have an NOI instead of an NSR with SSM emissions, you will be adding pieces of equipment to your inventory reportal. And we do ask that you, if possible, and if it makes sense, add the SSM emissions as coming from each piece of equipment. So you'll have your whatever piece of equipment it is that has SSM and its total actual emissions, including SSM. Then the next one is we use an environmental management database to perform all of our EPA greenhouse gas calculations. Are you saying we need to build calculation spreadsheets and redo all of these calculations? And I'm going to hand that one over to you, Rosalind.
So my question is, if you have to submit to EPA, no, you don't need to redo your greenhouse gases calculations. If you submit to EPA, then you need to submit to us, but we're going to go over greenhouse gases and you'll see how simple the process is. It's not a complex process at all. And it's very straightforward, and Sean will review it. Okay, so we'll get to that. Let's go on down. Stack information. So Sean will talk about this too later. The bottom line is that every piece of equipment really needs a stack. And if there's no actual stack, then you can use a fugitive with the default height of 10 feet, or if you happen to know what the actual height of it is, you put in the actual height of the vent. Okay, AQB's calculation tool, Calcatenate, is being developed, and next week, as Angela mentioned earlier, if you want training on that, please come to next week's training. Eric Peters will be here to do the demonstration, and the whole session will be fairly dedicated to go over how it works. So methods for calculating actual emissions we're doing because we want to see consistency in the method. So we have created 4 tiers. So the first tier, of course, is going to be the preferred tier with SEMS and actual compliance test. 2, process simulator is going to include like Promax and HYSYS. And 3 will be the EPA AP42 approved emission calculations. And then for you're all probably familiar with tanks and so on. Okay, let's scroll down, some descriptions of each one of those. The calculation spreadsheet requirements. This is a list of the different things that we're requiring in your spreadsheet, because we do look at your calculations to make sure that you're using the latest emission factor and the correct emission factor for your piece of equipment. Tanks AP42 has updated their emission factors in 2020, and we're asking that you use the updated emission factor for your tanks. Okay, I hope that's clear. If there's any questions, go over this and make sure those 6 parameters are included in your calculations. Portables is an interesting company, type of company. They've been given mostly NOIs, some are NSRs, and we have decided that the owning company, the one who holds the permit, is the one that is responsible for the emissions inventory. However, if they make an agreement with the leasing company, the information from the leasing company and input it, or the leasing company can input the data, but they also need to note that this is a leased piece of equipment under notes. Okay, this is very important. Okay, let's scoot down. I'm trying to hurry. We're quite a bit of time. Reporting inactive facilities is become a really popular thing. There are facilities that heard about this and are doing, companies who have heard about the emissions inventory for 2020 and are doing some cleanup of their database. So they're closing facilities in 2020. So there's a couple of different things that are going on that you need to be really aware of, that if you have closed a facility in 2020, let's say in June, you're responsible for submitting emissions inventory from January 1st to the closure date. Now, because it was active in our database, but if it did not run, then we have a button that says you can submit, you can select 0 emissions and then submit that. And we have a couple of scenarios here that you may want to look at also, and Sean will cover. Let's just kind of skip this part because we're kind of running out of time. Close facility. Oh, there you are. Okay. So, okay. So.
Can you see my screen, Rosalind?
Yeah, you kind of fell off the planet for a moment.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. If a facility does not have a closure date, complete the permitting administrative form. This is something written by permitting. So there's a permitting administrative multi-form that if you have any changes, please use that form. And it's on the permitting activities link. And there's some information here, let's see, that you may want to go over. This one's really important. Changes in NAICS codes. There was a change in NAICS codes in 2017 for oil and gas. It's very simple. The 211111, you see that, you know it's incorrect. If you have that NAICS code please look to see if you are either crude petroleum extraction or natural gas extraction, which you can see the NAICS codes in the far left-hand column. You can send us a request for support and ask us to change the NAICS code for that facility. If you have a long list of facilities and they've all changed the NAICS codes to either crude oil or natural gas or whatever it may be, we can do that internally. And also there were some changes in NAICS codes in mining. So some of these NOIs date back to 1995, 1976 even. So the NAICS codes have not been updated. So expect your NAICS codes to have not been updated if you have not been keeping up with your air quality permit. Okay, so we're done with that, and I think I'm going to hand it over to Sean.
And Sean, I had to mute you because there was some feedback. So if you could unmute yourself.
Sounds good. Thank you, Angela. And thank you for going over all of that, Roslyn. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them at this time or at any time during when I'm speaking. And also, if anything is ambiguous and you'd like to have more clarification, feel free to ask your question as well. Let me just try to get rid of this top bar. I'm not sure if you all are seeing that. Okay, so I will be going over the AEIR application itself and going through a few different aspects of it that we want to highlight to our community. So just so you know, I am in our testing environment, which is the QA environment. So any changes that I make today in this training will not be reflected in the industry environment, which will have a blue banner. I know that I'm in a testing environment because I have this purple banner up here. So we are just using this because we don't have access to your particular facilities in the production environment, so we cannot make changes to those. So just to safely make changes on our end, just to show you guys how to actually use our program, we will be using this testing environment. And once you register for your Secure Extranet Portal account, or SEP account for shorts, you'll be brought to this home screen where you can register for different air quality program applications. And yes, right here, you can see, oh, yes, Angela?
Sorry, it's like we already have two things. The first is, can you zoom in again?
Oh, yes. Thank you for the reminder.
And then it looks like Terry, who is with the Air Quality Bureau, has a question. Go ahead, Terry.
I do have a question. I was just wondering, is excess emissions requiring, or excuse me, is the emissions inventory requiring excess emissions for NOIs to be reported?
So we're requiring that actual emissions be reported. That does include excess emissions, right? It's
okay.
Everything that was emitted.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And I should note for everyone on the call that is slightly different than reporting to the Air Quality Bureau that you had excess emissions. If you have concerns about that or excess emissions, feel free to reach out to us so we can clarify your exact situation.
Perfect. Thank you, Angela. And again, so once you log into your SEP account, this will be your homepage. If you're not registered for AIR, you can click on Show All Available Applications and register for AIR, and we can manually grant you access. As you can see right here, air emissions inventory reporting, I have been granted access and I am approved. So if I click on that and open it in a new screen, I have already preloaded it because our testing environment can be somewhat slow, especially since I'm a super user, which means that I have access to every single facility in New Mexico. So once you click on that application itself, it'll be brought to your AIR homepage, which looks like this. Now there are a few different sections of this homepage. Each of them are separated by this blue banner right here. So the first top section is news and information, where we'll occasionally post of any important updates that are going on with the emissions inventory, and you can also find our contact information here. In the production environment, you'll also see my name here along with Rosalind's. And just so you know, I have a joint appointment in the emissions inventory section as well as the small business assistance program. So if you are a small business, feel free to contact me and I can help you through any small business needs as well as any emissions inventory needs. So my number will be here as well as my email. And you can also find this information on that emissions inventory webpage that we were presenting earlier, right here at the very bottom right here. There's a emissions inventory staff. You can contact us and find our information that way as well. So the second section is your facility emissions reporting sections. And under this section, you'll be able to see all of your companies and organizations in these bolded left adjacent parts and all the facilities under those organizations to the right. And they all have their own hyperlinks as well. In order to see these facilities though, as Rosalind noted, you have to actually register for them. So be sure when you first get into AEIR, click here to register for additional facilities and or roles at existing facilities. Once you click on that, you'll be brought to another page where you can select your organization and select roles at each facility in those organizations to register for, and we can approve you for those. And I will scroll down to the bottom. So again, I'm a super user, so I have access to all facilities in New Mexico, so yours shouldn't be as complex as mine is. All right, and then in a second to last section, before we go into that, at the bottom of the second section, we have a few buttons here that help you navigate AEIR. So navigate your submittals in AEIR. So once you can create submittals. And once you create submittals, you have options to edit submittals, certify them, view certified submittals, and as well as delete submittals. And in the second to last section, you have an option to create new emission inventories. So if you have not created a submittal for your facility, this is where you'll do so. You can select the facility name in here through this drop-down menu. You can also type in part of the name of the facility itself, and it'll do a fuzzy search to find that facility. Or if you know your agency interest number, you can type in the number itself. And then you can select the reporting year and create a new submittal. And you can also have an option right here to submit XML files for creating submittals. And this is useful for when you have many facilities under a company and it would be very tedious or it wouldn't make sense to do your submittal manually. And we will go in more detail into this next week in our concatenate section. But if you have any questions about XML, feel free to ask them at any point. And in general, if you have any questions about AEIR during this training, feel free to ask at any point as well. The last section is our greenhouse gas emissions inventory submission section. And as Rosalind said, you'll be required to submit greenhouse gas information to the New Mexico Environment Department. If you are required to submit that information to the EPA. And I believe that means that if you emit 25,000 tons of CO2 equivalents or more during the year, then you'll be required to submit to the EPA, which means that you'll be required to submit to us. However, that said, we will also be more than happy to accept any information you give us regarding greenhouse gases. If you do not submit to the EPA, even though you were not required to submit to us, we will be happy for you to give that information to us as well, because it'll help with our overall goal as the New Mexico Environment Department. And we'll go over this later on in this training. So there are a couple things I want to point out in AEIR. One is Rosalind spoke briefly about NAICS codes earlier. To check your NAICS code, you can click on any hyperlink to any facility, and it'll give you a NAICS code for that individual facility. So I clicked on this three barrier Libby gas plant, and it brought me to this page where I have the facility name, the AI number, the SIC code, as well as the NAICS code right here. So just check this code to make sure that it's correct. And it's important to have the correct NAICS code, because if it's not correct, the emissions inventory will not be accepted. And it'll have to be corrected before we can accept it and submit it to the EPA. So make sure that this is correct. And if it's incorrect, please let us know through the request for support button, which I'll get to you later on in this training. You can also check if other information is correct as well, such as your address, mailing address. And one other thing to note on this page is you can also grab your XML or download your XML file from this page for any individual facility.
Yes. Sean. Apparently, there is what sounds like a bug to me, where when they try to download an XML facility for a facility, the XML for another facility was downloaded instead.
Oh, yes, we are actually aware of this, and thank you for reminding us. We should note that in our guidance. So the bug in our program is if you enter into a submittal at any time, no matter which hyperlink you click on here, you'll always be downloading the same XML file. So the trick to get around this is log out of AEIR, and then log out of AEIR completely, then log back in, and before entering any submittals, so don't go and edit any submittals. Before entering any submittals, download all of your individual XML files that you need onto your computer, and you should be downloading the correct ones. And always be sure to be checking that you have the correct AI numbers in your XML files. So as of right now, I haven't entered any submittal yet. So I should be able to download an XML file, and it should be the correct one. So if I click on this Get Current XML File button right here, so it says NMED data facility ID 38067. That matches this agency interest ID right here, 38067. So I should be able to download this, and I should be safe to say that it is the correct XML for this facility. And if that sounds confusing to you, feel free to email me later or ask me to clarify.
Sean, do you want to show how to do a bulk download?
Yes, that sounds like a great idea as well. Yeah, we also recently made a change to our program because some organizations have many facilities underneath them, such as Devon is one of them. Yeah, so Devon Energy Production Company has many facilities underneath it, and it would be very tedious to go under each one and download the XML file individually. So we made a change to allow you to do a bulk download of all of the XML files underneath that one organization. And to do that, the company name is now hyperlink. You can click on that hyperlink. And this organization name is Devon Energy Production Company LP. Click on this Get Current NMED Organization Data XML file, and you should be able to download all of the facilities at the same time. I'm not going to do it right now because it does take a while, because I am downloading a bunch of XML files into one XML file. So it'll be a long one.
And question, John, I believe this is directly related to what your question is. This is the functionality that you would use to eventually upload multiple facilities at once. But if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. That was essentially it. There is incomplete and missing equipment from this system when we download the XML files. And so if would we update the schema mirroring other similar equipments and just update the designation? I think that the problem that we were wondering about internally was, how do we update that equipment ID that is used within AEIR that successively counts the equipment? Would we just update that ourselves?
So if I'm understanding the problem correctly, is it that you downloaded the XML file and there is missing equipment from the XML file?
Correct. There are request authorization for all the sites, but they do not themselves all have equipment that is presently on site.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, so under that, so XML file rules have the same rules that apply to manual submission, in that if your permit type or if your type of facility is an NOI or a GCP 2, 3, 5, or 6, it's very likely that we don't have equipment data for those facilities in our database, and which is why we are allowing those types of facilities to add equipment themselves. So if you have a facility that is of one of those types, NOIs, GCP 2, 3, 5, or 6, you can go into the XML file and add that equipment yourself, either manually, which I hear is not recommended to do it manually in an XML file. And if you can, it would be best to connect it to your database to have it done automatically. I'm not quite sure on how to do that. Eric Peters might have more insight onto how to connect the XML to your database. But does that answer your question, or is there more detail to that?
Yeah, basically, I'm getting reassurance that that method exists because it would have to be done for dozens and dozens of sites. But we can take that conversation offline if it's a little more complicated in explanation for the sake of time. Okay, yeah. If there is, if you would like a more detailed explanation, feel free to email me and we can get down into it. Alrighty, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, again, so as I was saying, these XML file downloads have the same problems as before. So before going into any submittal to edit that submittal, download all of your XMLs first, and then go ahead and edit any submittal that you need to make sure that you're downloading the correct XML file. And always try to double check that you're working with the correct facilities before working with XML. Okay, so I am going to go into a facility submittal right now to show you what it looks like. So we've been using this facility right here to do all our trainings with. It's Arnold Federal Compressor Station. And as you can see, we've created multiple submittals for multiple years. So I'm going to create a new 2020 submittal. And to do so, I will go to the bottom of the page. And in here, I will type in either 326 for that AI number, or another way to do it is just type in the name of the facility. I'll give it a moment to load the reporting years. And in here, you'll see that all the reporting years that we've already created a submittal for are not showing up, but 2020 is. And once I create this new submittal, to access it again later, I will have to click on the radio button next to the submittal and then click on edit submittal. But since I'm trying to access it for the first time right now, I will create it as a new submittal. And here it is. So as you can see, this AI 326 Arnold Federal Compressor Station is an NOI, but it also has one piece of equipment. So that makes it a little unique, and that's why it's a good one to show in our trainings. So this existing piece of equipment here, it was activated in 1994, and it has an ID of equipment 1 and designation of 001. This piece of equipment cannot be deleted. So you cannot delete existing equipment from your submittals. And you'll get this error message if you try to do so. But I will try to show you how to add a new piece of equipment as of right now. So once you see that you have these 3 buttons down here, add, modify, and remove, you know that this facility is of the type of NOI or GCP 2, 3, 5, or 6, because if it has any other permit type, you will not see these 3 buttons on your submittal. So right now I will add a piece of equipment. And let's just say I want to add a crusher to this facility. I will add a unit designation right here, and the designation
It's just the name that you yourself give to the subject item or the piece of equipment. And it's just a descriptive name that will help you remember what it is. So I will call this one crusher 1. And under unit category, we have, looks like 5 category types. We've updated this since last time. We have 5 category types, and we have 5 categories, and we have different types routing to each of those categories. And in our guidance document in Appendix A, we have specific one-to-one relationships shown between these. And that would be very useful if you are trying to use an XML symbol, because you don't want to use a category type or a category that doesn't match up with the unit type. You want these to have the correct relationship. So for instance, if I choose an activity and under activity, I have sandblasting, but under equipment, I don't have sandblasting. So I can't use equipment and sandblasting. And this is taken care of in our manual submittal right here, but in an XML, you have to be more careful because you can choose those 2 different and incorrect types. So just make sure that you're doing it correctly, and Appendix A is the place to go to find the correct information. And under description, you can just type in a longer description of what this piece of equipment is, primary crusher or cement. Okay. And manufacturer, if you know what the manufacturer is, please input that information here, as well as capacity in units if you know what those are, and put them here, and construction date as well. For the purpose of this training, I will not put this information in right here, but if you do have any of this, please put them in, because we'll be happy to collect any data that you give us. And as far as the SEC, there is SECs, which stands for Source Classification Codes, are given out by the EPA, and each piece of equipment has a unique SEC identifier. And it's the best way to find these are in our resources section in our guidance, which is in Appendix D. We have an official link to EPA's description of what SECs are, as well as an official link to EPA's SEC Finder. Another useful way to find SECs for your pieces of equipment is through Google. If you're having trouble using EPA's own data sources, Google is a good alternative. So I happen to know what the crusher SEC is off the top of my head. So it's, for the first one, it's 3 industrial processes, and they're 4-part codes, by the way. SECs are, all of them have 4 parts. And we have, in our AEIR system, we have a builder right here, and I recommend you go through the builder to denote your SEC or to find your SEC, because as you go through each level, it gets more constrained as you go through each subsequent level. So the second level is 5 for mineral products. The third level will be 20 for stone quarrying. And the last level will be 1 for primary crushing. So that is the SEC for a crusher. And then, as Rosalind was saying before in our guidance about stacks, each piece of equipment requires a stack. And you had different stack types, such as fugitives, vertical stacks, horizontal stacks, and so on. So fugitive stacks are different than everything else. So the other 5, there are 5 of them. The other 5 are considered point source stacks. And what that means is that emissions from these pieces of equipment come out of a single point, which is the stack itself. But a fugitive stack you can think of as a volume source. So what fugitives mean is that there's no real stack. You can't think of any one point on the piece of equipment that the emissions will come out of. And you can see that how this applies to a crusher. There's no one single point on the crusher where all of the emissions come out of. So it is considered a fugitive. So I will just say the description for this will be stack for pressure 1. And as you can see, when I did click on fugitive, the height defaulted to 10 and everything else became grayed out because we don't need any of this other information. If you have more pertinent or if you have better information for the heights of the piece of equipment where emissions are coming out of, you can change this 10 to the better available information. But if you don't know it, you can leave it as a default of 10. If I click on any of these other types of stacks, all that other information is required. So just so you know. For right now, I'll just leave it as fugitive and I'll click on save. And as you can see, this new piece of equipment here was created today. It's labeled as new, and I have the ability to modify and remove it, unlike the existing piece of equipment where I cannot modify and remove this one. So if at any point you need to change the information that you put in, click on modify, or if you made a mistake and that equipment doesn't actually exist, you can remove it before submitting and certifying your emissions inventory. Now, just so you know how to go through the rest of the process, I just created the piece of equipment. That doesn't mean that I have not input the details or the emissions for that piece of equipment yet. So we can do that right now. I can click on the radio button next to the crusher, click on detail, and it'll bring me to this screen. So it'll be the details form, and it'll tell me that it's a crusher. It'll give me the SCC and so on. And the first question on each piece of equipment is, was this equipment active at any time during the year? If you're adding the piece of equipment, it's likely going to be yes. But if there's an existing piece of equipment that you have on your submittal, but it wasn't active at any point during the year, feel free to click on no, and everything will be grayed out and it will be zeroed out. But since I just added this, it will likely be a yes, that this was active during the year. I will put in the materials processed right here. I said it was a cement crusher. So I put materials processed as cement, and it could be either an input or an output. And operating details. So we have 4 questions about the operating time and 4 questions about the % operation during each season. So as far as operating time goes, the most important one is this last one, operating time in hours per year. Make sure that is as accurate as possible for your actual emissions inventory. So if you know that you operated for 2,512 hours during the course of 2020, put that in, and for that individual piece of equipment. And then the rest, if you've been keeping detailed information, feel free to put it in here. It's just that I say that this is the most important one because some people have equipment that, such as generators or something, where they didn't have consistent operating hours during each week or during each day, because these other 3 questions are kind of assuming that you have consistent operating hours. So if you don't, just make sure that this one is correct and average out the other 3. But if you do have consistent operating hours, like you know that you ran your piece of equipment for 8 hours per day and 5 days per week and 52 weeks during the year, you can put that in. But if you don't have those consistent operating hours, again, the last one is the most important one, and average out these other 3. And then
Sean, I think we have a question.
Yes.
Angela, I can't tell who has their hand.
Deanna, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Thank you, Sean. So I'm looking at an export from AEIRs, so I'm not sure how it is in the XML schema for import, but is there actually a field to indicate if the equipment was inactive?
Yes, there actually.
Okay, because I don't remember seeing it, and I just wanted to make sure, because if not, I was going to say, oh, can y'all put that in the XML schema as well? So
yes, there actually should be a field if you're using the tool.
yes,
or if you're using Calcatinate, there is an option that says active or something, activity, or something along those lines, and you can either put yes or no there.
Did you say that's in Calcatinate? Because we're not using Calcatinate.
Oh, it's also in the other tool. So
it is in the XML schema.
Eventually that tool will be wrapped into Calcatinate. but they will both exist on our website still.
Okay, because no, we're just using the XML schema directly, and I just didn't remember that being in there. And I know that exports don't currently have that field. Thank you, which would make sense. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, no problem. And if you're still having trouble with it later on, feel free to email us and we can look into it a little bit more. But it should be there. I personally used it, so it should be good to go. Okay, and then if anybody else has any questions, feel free to ask them, by the way. But then the last 4 questions are percent operation during each season of the year. And this is to give us additional data. Make sure that these add up to 100%. So the most likely scenario would be 25% for each season, although 2020 was a different year, so you might have a different operating schedule during 2020. And then subject item comments, here you can add any comments you have for this individual piece of equipment. For this crusher, I can put in any comments I have for this specific crusher right here, and I can save it. And it'll bring me to the next page, which is the emissions page. And then by default, for all new pieces of equipment that are created manually through AEIR, we default all of the criteria pollutants as well as VOCs into this middle form. If your piece of equipment did not emit some of these pollutants, feel free to remove the pollutant from the list or just put it in as 0. Either way would work. We'd probably prefer that you just remove the pollutant if it doesn't exist, just so that we don't get as much data. But if you want to put 0, that would work for us as well. So I can remove a bunch of this equipment or a bunch of these pollutants because the unit is not a source of these pollutants. So make sure to select the reason for removal and you can remove it. So as you can see, all these ones are grayed out and they have been removed as their status, but these 2 pollutants still exist. I can also add pollutants by clicking on this add pollutant button. And I'll just show you how this works really quick. You can click on this search box and there'll be a drop-down menu where you can click on as many pollutants as you need. You can also do a search for pollutants and it'll do a fuzzy search. And you can add all of these pollutants to the list. I'm not going to add them right now, but I just wanted to show you how it worked. So I'll cancel this out. And I'll just put in some dummy values to actually complete this piece of equipment. And you also will need to choose a calculation method. And as Roslyn went over earlier, we have different preferences and different tiers for our calculation methods, but just be sure to choose it from this list, the one that you used, and have the calculations to back them up.
And Sean, we do have a question.
Yes.
Do we need to report total haps as a pollutant if we are already reporting individual haps? Total haps is not available on XML schema. So if it is required to report total haps, then we would have to manually enter it in AEIR.
If your pollutants are already speciated in your permit, we would like you to submit those speciated pollutants. But Rosin, do you know if we want them to also report total haps, or will just the speciated ones be fine?
If it depends on how your permit is set up. If you're talking about an NSR, then I would refer back to the permit. If it's an NOI and you have benzene and formaldehyde, then do that. But total haps, see if total haps comes up. I know we just changed some of the pollutant codes.
Yeah, total haps should be here because I've used it before, but I think what we didn't realize is total haps aren't in the XML. So we need to ask Mark to change that. So we can change the XML so that you can report total haps if that's the issue.
All right. Okay. So yeah, I'm not an XML expert.
Okay, so if you're still having trouble with that question, feel free to email us and we'll definitely get back to you. Or if you ask for additional clarification, we can do it right here as well.
Have a clarifying question, and that's if we're going to add total haps to the XML schema. I think the answer to that's probably yes, right, Sean?
Yeah, I'll request it after this training right here. Thank you for bringing that up, by the way. We didn't see that in our testing. Yes, so that should be added to the schema. I'm not sure when, but we'll bring it up to our developer right after this meeting. And also, just so that you know, you can also add decimals to this file. And I believe our position is 3 decimal points as of right now, but feel free to put as many as you need and it'll round it. And then, so once you have your amounts for the entire year in here, as well as the calculation methods you used, you can click on save. And it'll show that this piece of equipment is now complete. And it'll have the check mark to show that it is complete. And once you have completed all of your pieces of equipment right here, there'll be a new button saying that it's ready to review. So just for the sake of training, I'll say that although this internal combustion engine just to make up the story for the training, like say that this internal combustion engine is existing, but let's say it didn't run during the course of the year at all. I can go into details. And for the first question, was this equipment active during the year? I'll select no, which means that everything gets grayed out. And I can say didn't run or something in the comments. And since it didn't run, it will have no emissions of any pollutants. So I can just close this new screen right here, and that one is now complete as well. And as you can see, there is a yellow review for submittal button right here. And as Rosalind briefly went over in the guidance as well, if your facility did not operate at all in 2020, but you did have an active permit, during any point of 2020, you will be required to submit an emissions inventory for 2020 to us. But let's say that's the case and there's no equipment here, you can't submit an emissions inventory without any equipment. So if there is no equipment, you can add a dummy fugitive. And by that, I mean that you would just add a fugitive right here. It would be under release point and then under fugitives. And you can just call it like plant fugitives or something along those lines. You can put, just create a description, and the SEC for a fugitive would be 3, and then 10, 8888, and 11. And then the stack for a fugitive, which is the fugitive stack, and stack for fugitives. And I'll just create that. So under this scenario, I'm pretending that these 2 pieces of equipment aren't even here. This is the only piece of equipment. And I will mark this as not being active during the course of the year. And once you save that, you should be able to submit the inventory to us. If that's confusing, feel free to let me know right now, and I can explain it in a different way or in more detail.
Sean.
Yes.
Let's stop right here for a quick second. Some people have dropped off, but for those of you, there's a large number of you that are still on. And I want to go over this manage e-sign button, and we're going to send out information. This is how you're going to register now for certification. This is only for the certifiers to do this. We only have a certain amount of slots for certifiers to do that. We will post the information and request that the certifiers become approved early next week. And the next one is that we're receiving a lot of questions about greenhouse gases, so I'm sure that's, I'll let you take it over. Thank you.
I'm going to make a quick note in here. We are going to wait that you ask that you wait to click on that Manage e-sign button till we send out that information early next week. It's not quite ready, but it will be ready early next week. The second note is we are aware we are going quite long in this meeting. We are recording it, and we will make that recording available on the emissions inventory website. So if you do have to leave us, you can look for that recording, and we will be covering this information again in future trainings.
Great, thank you for those clarifications, Rosalind and Angela. Very helpful. Yeah, so as Rosalind and Angela were saying, as of next week, you can click on this e-manage button to set up an account in order to certify your emissions inventory. So the way that works is after adding each piece of equipment and adding the details and emissions for all of them, you'll have a complete sign right here, and this yellow review for submittal button will pop up. Before clicking on that, you'll want to input any comments for the entire facility itself. These are different than the equipment level comments. These comments are just anything that you want us to know regarding this entire facility. So this one would be the Arnold Federal Compressor Station. If there is anything special about that and you want us to know it, feel free to input that right here and click on Save Your Comments. And the next thing is at the bottom of the screen, there is an area where you can attach your calculations to the submittal. Please attach those before submitting and reviewing for submittal. But after that, you can click on the review for submittal button, go through everything that you've added to make sure that everything is correct. If it's not correct, please go back and edit it to make it correct. And then you'll be able to certify your emissions inventory. And in order to do that, you'll have to have this Manage e-sign account set up. So please go through that process next week of managing your e-sign. And if you have any troubles, let us know. We just got through the hurdle over the course of the past few months, and we believe it's ready to go now. But if you find that you are having trouble or if there's something wrong with it, please let us know so that we can fix it. And as far as that goes, I will now go over greenhouse gases. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them.
I'm not seeing any questions right now. If you do have questions, please go ahead and raise your hand or type it in the chat box. All right, Sean, I'm not seeing anything yet. I'll interrupt you if we get any questions.
All right, sounds good. So as far as greenhouse gas submittals go, our new greenhouse gas submittal is through organization or the company level rather than facility level. So for instance, as you click on this drop-down menu right here, the only things you'll see are your individual companies and not the facilities underneath those companies. So if you own just, for instance, Double Eagle Sand and Gravel, this might have a few facilities underneath it, or it might have hundreds of facilities underneath it. Whatever the case, you can only create a greenhouse gas submittal for the company itself. And the reporting year would be 2020. And this is to make it so that it's more congruent with what EPA requests. And as we said before, if you submit to the EPA, if you submit greenhouse gas information to the EPA, we do require you to submit it to us. But if you do not, we would encourage you to submit it to us anyways, just so that we can get more data, and having more data is just beneficial for our community. So I've clicked on this Create New Greenhouse Gas Annual Reporting Submittal button, and it's just loading. And I will show you the process of how to go through your greenhouse gas submittal. Another thing to note is that we require you to only submit information for New Mexico. So if you do have a basin, if you're an oil and gas facility, if you do have a basin that goes across state lines, we request that you filter out the New Mexico data and only give us New Mexico related data. And in this emissions inventory or emissions information section at the top here, we tried to model it after what EPA requires. So what they require is that you submit your greenhouse gas data through different subparts that they've created. So we have those subparts listed here. Some common subparts would be, for instance, subpart C, which is general stationary fuel combustion sources. Subpart D is a common one, electricity generation. There's subpart UU, injection of carbon dioxide. Subpart W is a very common one, as well as petroleum and natural gas systems. So just filter or categorize your greenhouse gas information in these different subparts. And if you've already submitted to the EPA, you should have it already categorized. So for instance, I'll click on subpart W, and we only require 3 greenhouse gases to be submitted to us, and we only allow for 3 greenhouse gases to be submitted to us, and they're the most common ones, which are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So feel free to change these numbers according to what you've calculated. And you can also leave them as 0 if that's not part of them, but most likely you'll have all 3 probably. You can add new subparts. So if you submitted multiple subparts to the EPA, we can allow you to submit multiple subparts to us as well. So you have subpart W up top, subpart C right here. I have this many carbon dioxide emissions, metric tons per year in subpart C, and this amount of carbon dioxide emissions in subpart W.
We have a question.
Thank you, Rosalind. Mike, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, and I think this was asked earlier, what do you want submitted with this? I mean, we're going to submit subpart W and subpart C and so forth to EPA, but that includes facilities within and outside of New Mexico. What is the attachment that are you looking for us to cull our data to get an attachment for you? Can't we just waive that and just know that EPA is QAing it? Anyway, that's my question. We need some guidance on what you expect attached to this.
Mike will definitely think about that and provide an answer next week, if that's all right. We want to take into
Sure, that's fine.
consideration.
We need to know what to submit.
All right. We'll let you know by next week. We're going to continue with these trainings on a weekly basis, so we certainly have more time to talk about it. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for your question, and thank you, Rosalind, for answering. So you have your submittal comments right here for the greenhouse gas submittal specifically. And again, you can just type in any comments you have right here, and you can attach your calculation file here. Once you're done, you can click on Save and Close, and this is double eagle sand and gravel, so I can show you what it looks like afterwards. It does take a while for me to jump back to the homepage in our testing environment. So if there are any questions, now would be an opportune time to ask them.
All right, I'm not currently seeing any questions. So if you do have a question, raise your hand or type it in the chat box now. So we do have a question. So is greenhouse gas reporting only for sites that report to EPA?
The answer is yes. I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping in. Sorry, Sean. The answer is yes, primarily. Okay. The answer, Aaron, is or Adam. is yes, but we are very hopeful that other companies who are not reporting to EPA do report their greenhouse gases. That way we have a better idea of what is happening in the state of New Mexico. And we know that EPA requires their greenhouse gas information to be submitted by company by basin. Now yes, with a total of 25,000 metric tons CO2 equivalent thresholds. Now for us, we would like for those companies, if they fall below the threshold because you're not including the entire basin, that doesn't give you an excuse to not submit to NMED. You still must submit because you do submit to EPA. The Permian Basin crosses Texas, and we have part of it in New Mexico. Then we also have the San Juan and the Raton Basin. So we just want the facilities, the totals of those facilities by subpart, 40 CFR 98, the different subparts that were shown to be submitted for the state of New Mexico. Operators who have basin-wide facilities that are below metric ton threshold are not required to report. Just to confirm, if you are reporting to EPA, and there's certain reasons why people report to EPA that have less than 25,000 metric tons, so that isn't a hardcore threshold that we ask that you submit to us. Is that clear? Sean, you can go ahead and take over. We should probably start wrapping up.
Okay, perfect. So I'm still waiting for this page to load so I can show everybody how the greenhouse gas submittal looks on the homepage. But one thing I did forget to mention before is that there is a blue request support from NMED button for each submittal. So not only for greenhouse gas submittals, but for that Arnold Federal Compression Station emissions inventory general submittal. We saw before, there is also a request support from NMED button. And feel free to click on that button at any time to send us an individual message for any individual submittal. If you're having any trouble with it, or if you want to update your NAICS code, or just anything, any questions that you have regarding any facility, you can click on that button, send us a quick message, and we'll be sure to get back to you.
Let me interrupt again. This is Rosalind. Adam, I understand, but to confirm, you do not report to EPA then if it is not required to report to NMED. So if you are not required to report to EPA, then you do not have to, exactly for small companies that only have a few operating facilities in the state of New Mexico, or if it's, then you don't have to report your greenhouse gases, but we would be very appreciative if you did. If the company is so large that you're in the Permian, let's say, I can't give you I'm not going to give you a name of a company, but if you have so many facilities, and most of the facilities do lie in Texas, but there's several in New Mexico, but the bulk of the emittance of greenhouse gases come from Texas facilities, and you are required to report to EPA due to that, then you must report all of the information from New Mexico facilities by the parent company to NMED. I hope that's clear. We will definitely go over it again next week. And also look it up in the guidance document. Sean and I have been planning on doing a YouTube video on it, and we'll explain it in that too. Hopefully, if that's not clear, drop me an email at any time and we can talk about it some more. Thank you. Sean, go ahead.
Great, thank you,
Actually,
Rosa.
Sean, I'm going to break in because it looks like Leslie, who's with the Air Quality Bureau, has a question for us. Go ahead, Leslie. Or she doesn't.
Hi, it's not really a question. I'm just, since Sean brought it up about the request button for NAICS code changes, I did pop something in the channel. When you are submitting requests to change your NAICS code, it would be super helpful to us if you would include the associated SIC code that goes with it, because if the code you want to change it to doesn't match the current SIC code that you have, we have to contact you to ask what SIC code you want for your facility. And I did put a link in there where you can find the associated SIC and NAICS codes. So if you request those, if you just also put the SIC code in there, it can prevent any back and forth that we might have to do.
Okay, sounds good, Leslie. Thank you for that clarification. We will also update that in our guidance to request both the NAICS code and the SIC code when requesting for support. And as far as this greenhouse gas submission goes, our homepage is now loaded. And so this Double Eagle Sand and Gravel is the company name or the organization name. And right underneath that is the greenhouse gas submittal that we just created. Now, there is only one facility underneath Double Eagle Sand and Gravel. So it's very unlikely that this company will be required to submit a greenhouse gas submittal, especially since it is most likely that this is a construction company and not an oil and gas company. But just to show you guys what an oil and gas company would potentially look like and what it would look like in yours, let me just go to the top real quick. Okay, so I have Devon Energy Production Company, LP. Now, as you can see, there's many facilities underneath here, but I did create a greenhouse gas submittal earlier during December of last year when I was testing this out. And this is most likely what you will see if you were required to submit a greenhouse gas submittal to us. The greenhouse gas submittal will be right underneath the organization name, and underneath the submittal would be all the facility names and all the individual submittals for each of those facilities. So this is how it will most likely look for you if you are required to submit a greenhouse gas submittal. Now, are there any final questions before we end this training session?
I think we just got a message from Eric confirming that total haps do not need to be reported. Also, for those of you that are still on, and we're happy to see that you're still on, if all your questions were answered now, you remember we have several weeks ahead of us, and if you of training sessions, and if you want to, you can drop an email to Sean and I asking your question, and we will definitely get you an answer. Thank you all for attending. Sean, go ahead.
Great, thank you, everyone. As Roslyn said, if you have any additional questions or want more clarifications, feel free to contact us. We will be having additional trainings through the end of February, so feel free to check in. And next week's training is again on calcatenate, and we also might give some time to going through the certification process as well. If not next week, then the week after. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
And that ends our training session for today. So thank you all for attending, and we hope to see